A brief history. Directors then and now. Al Capone. In the Roaring Twenties, Al Capone ruled an empire of crime in the Windy City. Gambling, prostitution, bootlegging, bribery, narcotics trafficking, robbery, protection rackets, and murder. And it seemed that law enforcement couldn't touch him. The early Bureau would have been happy to join the fight to take Capone down, but we needed a federal crime to hang our case on, and the evidence to back it up. Eventually, that day would come. Early years. Born of an immigrant family in Brooklyn, New York in January 1899, Al Capone quit school after the 6th grade and associated with a notorious street gang, becoming accepted as a member. Johnny Torrio was the street gang leader, and among the other members was Lucky Luciano, who would later attain his own notoriety. About 1920, at Torrio's invitation, Capone joined Torrio in Chicago, where he had become an influential lieutenant in the Colosimo mob. The racket spawned by enactment of the Prohibition Amendment, illegal brewing, distilling and distribution of beer and liquor were viewed as growth industries. Torrio, abetted by Al Capone, intended to take full advantage of opportunities. The mob also developed interests in legitimate businesses in the cleaning and dyeing field and cultivated influence with receptive public officials, labor unions, and employees' associations. Torrio soon succeeded to full leadership of the gang, with the violent demise of Big Jim Colosimo, and Capone gained experience and expertise as his strong right arm. In 1925, Capone became boss when Torrio, seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, surrendered control and retired to Brooklyn. Capone had built a fearsome reputation in the ruthless gang rivalries of the period, struggling to acquire and retain racketeering rights to several areas of Chicago. That reputation grew as rival gangs were eliminated or nullified, and the suburb of Cicero became, in effect, a fiefdom of the Capone mob. Al Capone mugshot. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, might be regarded as the culminating violence of the Chicago gang era, as 7 members or associates of the Bugs, Morin mob, were machine-gunned against a garage wall by rivals posing as police. The massacre was generally ascribed to the Capone mob, although Al himself was in Florida. The Bureau gets involved. The investigative jurisdiction of the Bureau of Investigation during the 1920s and early 1930s was more limited than it is now, and the gang warfare and depredations of the period were not within the Bureau's investigative authority. The Bureau's investigation of Al Capone arose from his reluctance to appear before a federal grand jury on March 12, 1929, in response to a subpoena. On March 11, his lawyers formally filed for postponement of his appearance, submitting a physician's affidavit dated March 5, which attested that Capone had been suffering from bronchial pneumonia in Miami, had been confined to bed from January 13 to February 23, and that it would be dangerous to Capone's health to travel to Chicago. His appearance date before the grand jury was reset for March 20. On request of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Bureau of Investigation agents obtained statements to the effect that Capone had attended race tracks in the Miami area, that he had made a plane trip to Bimini and a cruise to Nassau, that he had been interviewed at the office of the Dade County Solicitor, and that he had appeared in good health on each of those occasions. Al Capone's fingerprint card. Arrest record for Al Capone, dated May 4, 1932. Arrest and convictions. Capone appeared before the federal grand jury in Chicago on March 20, 1929, and completed his testimony on March 27. As he left the courtroom, he was arrested by agents for contempt of court, an offense for which the penalty could be 1 year in prison and a $1,000 fine. He posted $5,000 bond and was released. On May 17, 1929, Al Capone and his bodyguard were arrested in Philadelphia for carrying concealed deadly weapons. Within 16 hours, they had been sentenced to terms of 1 year each. Capone served his time and was released in 9 months for good behavior on March 17, 1930. On February 28, 1931, Capone was found guilty in federal court on the contempt of court charge and was sentenced to 6 months in Cook County Jail. His appeal on that charge was subsequently dismissed. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department had been developing evidence on tax evasion charges. In addition to Al Capone, his brother Ralph Bottles Capone, Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik, Frank Nitti, and other mobsters were subjects of tax evasion charges. On June 16, 1931, Al Capone pled guilty to tax evasion and prohibition charges. He then boasted to the press that he had struck a deal for a 2.5-year sentence, but the presiding judge informed him he, the judge, was not bound by any deal. Capone then changed his plea to not guilty. On October 18, 1931, Capone was convicted after trial and on November 24, was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, fined $50,000 and charged $7,692 for court costs, in addition to $215,000 plus interest due on back taxes. The 6-month contempt of court sentence was to be served concurrently. While awaiting the results of appeals, Capone was confined to the Cook County Jail. Upon denial of appeals, he entered the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, serving his sentence there and at Alcatraz. Alphonse Gabriel Al Capone rose to infamy as a gangster in Chicago during the 1920s and early 1930s. Release from prison. On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released after having served 7 years, 6 months and 15 days, and having paid all fines and back taxes. Suffering from paresis derived from syphilis, he had deteriorated greatly during his confinement. Immediately on release, he entered a Baltimore hospital for brain treatment and then went on to his Florida home, an estate on Palm Island in Biscayne Bay near Miami, which he had purchased in 1928. Following his release, he never publicly returned to Chicago. He had become mentally incapable of returning to gangland politics. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist, after examination, both concluded Capone then had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife and immediate family, in a secluded atmosphere, until his death due to a stroke and pneumonia on January 25, 1947.